What does the Bible say about women in combat? This is the question we're going to be tackling here. And this is very much related to the discussion that we've had on feminism. So I'd encourage you, if you've not seen or heard the two-part series on feminism, that you perhaps do that first. It may be helpful to understand this. This is basically just the natural consequences of that discussion. What does the Bible say about women in combat? Now, in addressing this question, I want to look at two verses which, according to many feminists, are in fact very offensive. And the question is, should women be offended by these verses? And it's related to women in fighting. And if they should not be, what does it tell us about whether or not women should be in combat? So the first one comes from Nahum chapter 3, verse 13. And this is in the context of a pronouncement of judgment that's coming against Nineveh. And one of the things that's going to happen is we see in verse 13, surely your people in your midst are women. Now, in the context, the idea of people there is troops, soldiers, people who are fighting. Surely your people, your soldiers, your troops in your midst are women. The gates of your land are wide open for your enemies. Fire shall devour the bars of your gates. So the question is, should women be offended when the scriptures describe male soldiers as women in a way that is meant to be insulting? Should a woman be offended by that? That seems to be what is happening in Nahum chapter 3. Now, another verse that's very similar comes in Isaiah chapter 19. And this comes in the context of a judgment that's coming against Egypt. And something very similar is said. In that day, Egypt will be like women, and will be afraid and fear because of the waving of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which he waves over it. So in both of these cases, in Nahum chapter 3 and in Isaiah chapter 19, there is a description of certain men who are supposed to be fighting to protect these various nations, Nineveh being related to Assyria in Nahum, and then Egypt in Isaiah. And the question is, how should women respond to this? Is the Bible being demeaning towards women when it speaks this way? And the answer is very much related to your view on feminism and the distinction between men and women. In feminism, there is a breakdown of the distinction between men and women such that there is basically nothing that is distinctively male and nothing that is distinctively female either. And this comes along with a denigrating of the very glorious roles that women have been given in society. And it comes with a glorification of the things that men have typically done. And because of that, then there is a desire for women to do the things that men do. And there is this claim that men and women can do everything that the other can do, and particularly that women can do every single thing that a man can do. And to suggest otherwise is to be highly offensive. But this appears to be what the Bible is doing. In terms of fighting, it is the Bible uses a acknowledgement of men being like women as an insult. And why is this? The reason is because there is a distinction between men and women. Men and women are not the same. And women have not been made to fight in wars. They've not been made to fight in wars. And therefore, it is a shameful thing for a man who has been made to fight and whose duty and obligation it is to fight and to protect women, for him then to act like the women whom he is supposed to protect. Women aren't called to fight. And so if that's the case, then if a man acts like a woman and then refuses to fight and calls out for protection, which is very natural, right, and good for any woman to do. If a woman calls for help, there is no shame that comes to her. If a man calls out for help and is unable to have the courage to fight to protect women, then that is a shameful thing. And the reason for this is, again, because there is a distinction between men and women. And so when the Bible says in an insulting way that men who are soldiers are acting like women, it is in no way demeaning towards women. It's actually an insult to the men who are unable to perform the roles which they have been given. And they are relying on others. And in some places, even in the scripture, we see men relying on women all the time. That is sinful when it comes to fighting in warfare. Now, another place where we see this is with regard to the legislation for warfare in Deuteronomy, where there is, if a man is newly married, then he does not have to go to fight wars. He can stay home with his wife lest he die in the war and another take his wife. There's no corresponding legislation for women because it's assumed that they will only be men who fight in wars, because men are made to fight in wars in this way. Men are made stronger. Men have the role, the responsibility to protect and defend women. We see something similar with the instructions given to Israel as they are about to cross over the Jordan and come into the Promised Land. There were 2.5 tribes that wanted to stay on the east of the Jordan. So remember, the Promised Land is to the west of the Jordan. There were 2.5 tribes that wanted to stay to the east, but what Moses said is, your wives and your little ones can stay, but all the men, all of them, must cross over the Jordan with their brothers and fight for the land. And they can't go back to their homes until all the land is taken. And the reason for this is because there is an expectation that the men are going to fight, and it's not a shameful thing at all. It's a good and right thing for the women to stay behind and to care for their families and to do things around the home as they wait for their husbands to come back for war. But what the scriptures assume in all of this is that it is the duty of men to fight in battles. Just as it's the duty of a man to protect his wife in the home, so on a national scale, it is the duty of the men of a nation to fight to protect the women. And it is a shameful thing when men act like women and are unwilling to do that to which they've been called by God, and which is even evident in the way in which God has made them. And so all of this is just to say there is a distinction between men and women, and it does affect even really every area of society. It doesn't mean that men and women are different in terms of their equality before God, in terms of their worth and value, but it does mean that they're different, very different in the sense of the way in which they've been made and the various roles and functions that they have in light of that. And so the answer to the question, what does the Bible say about women being in combat? The answer is that women should not be in combat.